The night hung heavy with the kind of quiet that made every breath feel louder than it should, and Amina carried that quiet inside her like a storm waiting for some place to break. She moved through the dim hallway of the community center with the hate letter trembling in her hand, the words she wrote still burning behind her eyes. She told herself she wasn't scared, only angry, but her heartbeat betrayed her with every stubborn echo. When she slid the envelope under the backstage door where she knew Jordan would find it, a strange shiver ran through her body, as if part of her already regretted what she hadn't even watched unfold yet. Out in the fading dusk, the world felt paused, waiting for something to shift. She walked away fast, hoping distance could quiet the ache she refused to name, never imagining that the words meant to push him away would instead pull him toward her in ways neither of them were ready to understand. Amina spent the rest of the evening trying to busy herself with small, pointless tasks, anything to drown out the uncomfortable buzz inside her chest. She wiped down paint jars that were already clean, rearranged brushes until the bristles pointed in perfect alignment, even paced circles around her small living room as if movement could untangle the guilt twisting tighter with each step. She told herself the letter was justified, that he deserved it for speaking to her the way he did earlier, but the truth hovered stubbornly beneath her excuses. It wasn't what he said. It was how it reminded her of another voice she'd tried hard to forget. Every time she blinked, she saw the envelope leaving her hand, felt the echo of her own anger, and it made her stomach clench. She wondered if he'd found it yet, wondered what his face looked like as he read words shaped more by old wounds than by the moment that triggered them. She whispered to herself that it didn't matter, even though it clearly did. Jordan sat on the edge of his bed later that night, the letter unfolded in his hands, reading as if each line carried a different kind of truth he had never expected from someone he barely knew. The harshness of her words didn't sting the way they should have. Instead, they pulled him in, revealing pieces of someone trying too hard to sound unbothered. He traced the curves of the ink with his eyes, hearing something brittle behind every sharp phrase. Her anger didn't feel personal. It felt familiar, like the kind he once swallowed whole after losing someone he never got to make peace with. He let the silence in the room settle around him as he read again, slower this time, absorbing not the insults but the pain laced underneath. He wondered what made her feel so cornered, what story sat behind the heat of her sentences, and for reasons he didn't understand yet, he wanted to know. The next morning arrived heavy, with the kind of silence that made Amina feel like the world was watching her, even though no one knew what she had done. She walked back to the community center with a tightness in her chest she couldn't shake, telling herself she only came because she had work to finish. But each step took her closer to the possibility of seeing him, or worse, the moment he would confront her. She rehearsed explanations she knew she would never say out loud. The hallway seemed longer than usual, every familiar sound amplifying the nervous pulse in her wrists. When she pushed open the side door, the air shifted, carrying the faint echo of someone's soft footsteps. She froze briefly, unsure if she wanted him to be there or hoped he wasn't. Her heart tripped over itself at the thought that he might have read every word, and she suddenly wished she had written anything else. Jordan arrived at the center a little after she did, unaware she was already inside. He moved through the hallway with a calm, steady pace, the folded letter tucked into his jacket pocket like something he wasn't ready to let go of. When he turned the corner and saw her standing near the mural room door, both froze for a breath too long. The air felt thick, charged with something unsaid but impossible to ignore. Amina looked away first, bracing herself for accusations. But Jordan didn't raise his voice or ask why. He simply watched her with a softness she didn't expect. That gentleness unsettled her more than anger would have. It made her feel exposed, seen in ways she wasn't prepared for. Their silence stretched between them, a quiet truth neither could name yet. When he finally greeted her, his voice steady and warm, she felt something shift inside her, something she wasn't ready to face, but couldn't escape either. Jordan spent the next few nights doing something he couldn't explain even to himself. reading the letter over and over, as though every sharp line held a clue to a softer truth he wasn't meant to see yet. He sat on the floor beside his bed with the room dim, except for the warm lamp in the corner, letting the quiet settle around him while he traced each sentence with slow breaths. The harshness didn't bruise him. Instead, it made him wonder about the kind of hurt that drives someone to write with that much fire. Every reread peeled back a layer, revealing not anger but fear wrapped tightly around a heart that didn't want to be broken again. He didn't know why he cared, but he felt something rising inside him. A pull, a strange tenderness toward the person behind the rage. He found himself imagining what she might have gone through, and for the first time in weeks, he felt something other than numbness. Amina lay awake that same night, staring at the ceiling while replaying her confrontation with him over and over. Each time she imagined his reaction, her chest tightened with a mix of dread and embarrassment she didn't want to claim. She told herself he probably crumpled the letter and tossed it without a second glance, but something deeper whispered that he might not have. That uncertainty sat heavy on her chest. She rolled onto her side, pulling her blanket closer, wishing she could silence the parts of her heart that still cared how she was seen. Her thoughts drifted back to old wounds she never healed properly. Memories of someone who once dismissed her feelings until she learned to defend herself before she could be hurt. That habit lived in her hand when she wrote the letter. She wanted to believe she'd moved past the past, but in the quiet dark, she knew she hadn't. Not yet. Jordan began writing responses. Not letters he planned to send, but thoughts he needed to spill somewhere. He filled page after page in his notebook, not defending himself or arguing, but speaking to the version of her reflected in her own words. He wrote with a gentleness he didn't know he still had, asking questions she would never hear, and offering truths she would never read. Somehow putting his thoughts on paper helped him breathe easier, as if the letter had cracked open something he'd boarded up long ago. He didn't know why her anger felt familiar, but it echoed a loneliness he hadn't spoken about since before his father passed. The more he wrote, the more he realized he wasn't trying to fix her opinion of him. He was trying to understand the hurt behind it. And in doing so, he felt himself slowly waking from the emotional numbness he'd been living in. Amina walked into the community center later that afternoon, hoping to slip in unnoticed. She planned to work on a mural sketch, keep her head down, and avoid running into him. But the moment she stepped inside, she sensed the shift in the air. Something lighter, calmer, almost soothing. She heard distant laughter from one of the classrooms, but nothing from the auditorium, and that silence pressed against her nerves. She set her bag down on the paint table, forcing her hands to stay steady, even though her thoughts weren't. She didn't want to admit she wondered whether he'd look at her differently now, whether the letter changed something between them. She hated that she cared, but she did. She breathed deeply, trying to focus on her sketch, but her thoughts kept circling the possibility of crossing paths again. And as she picked up a pencil, her fingers shook more than she expected. Later that evening, Jordan returned to the community center, with the letter still folded neatly in his jacket pocket. He wasn't searching for her, he told himself, but he walked the hallways with a quiet awareness, noticing every sound, every flicker of movement. When he stepped into the main corridor, he stopped at the sight of her through the open doorway of the art room. She hadn't noticed him yet, her focus buried in her sketch. Something in her stillness softened him, made him forget the sting of their first argument. He hesitated before stepping closer, unsure if approaching her would make things worse. But he didn't want her fear or her past to be the only thing that defined how she saw him. He took a slow breath, then gently tapped the doorframe. She looked up, surprise flashing across her face, followed by something gentler, something she quickly tried to hide. The next time Jordan and Amina crossed paths, neither of them seemed fully prepared. They found themselves alone in the hallway outside the auditorium, the same place where everything had begun. Amina tried to walk past him with the same guarded confidence she always carried, but something about the quiet warmth in his expression made her hesitate. He didn't confront her or ask about the letter. He simply spoke to her with a calm sincerity that caught her off guard. He didn't try to correct her or defend himself. Instead, he asked how she was, as though the letter had never been written. That softness unnerved her, left her searching his tone for mockery or judgment, but finding none. She felt the ground shift beneath her, realizing he wasn't playing the role she expected. And for the first time, she wondered whether she had misread him more than he had misread her. Amina spent the rest of the day wrestling with the way he had spoken to her. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the way he looked at her, like he wasn't afraid of her sharp edges. She wasn't used to that. Most people either pushed back or backed away, but Jordan didn't do either. Instead, he stood there with a softness that made her feel seen in a way she couldn't explain. That unfamiliar feeling sat heavy in her chest as she painted alone in the art room, each brushstroke reflecting her tangled thoughts. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept slipping back to the gentle steadiness in his voice. She found herself questioning things she hadn't allowed herself to question in years. Whether the world was really as harsh as she believed, or whether she had built walls so high she couldn't tell the difference anymore. That evening, Amina visited her grandmother, hoping the familiar comfort would steady her restless thoughts. She sat at the kitchen table while the smell of warm cornbread and lavender steam drifted through the room, grounding her in memories that felt safer than the present. Grandma Lila didn't ask many questions. She never needed to. Instead, she listened with the patience of someone who understood pain without explanations. Amina hesitated before admitting she had written something she shouldn't have, and that the man she wrote it to wasn't reacting the way she expected. Her grandmother's soft chuckle filled the room, not mocking, but knowing. She reminded Amina that anger often grows from places we haven't healed, and that sometimes the people who surprise us are the ones we need to pay attention to. The quiet wisdom settled over her like warm sunlight, gently encouraging her to see beyond her fear. The next day, Jordan found himself standing in front of his poetry class, holding a notebook filled with things he had written, but never intended to share. Yet, something compelled him to open to a page written in response to Amina's letter. His students watched with quiet curiosity as he read a piece shaped by honesty and vulnerability rather than bitterness. He didn't use her name, didn't reveal the source, but every line carried the echo of someone trying to understand hurt instead of running from it. The words flowed from him more gently than he expected, revealing layers he rarely let anyone see. As he spoke, he felt something loosen in his chest, a release he hadn't realized he needed. When he finished, the room fell silent, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had spoken not just as a teacher, but as a man still learning to heal. Amina had stopped by the center to pick up supplies when she accidentally overheard Jordan's voice drifting down the hallway. Something in his tone made her pause. She stepped closer, curiosity tugging at her before she could talk herself out of it. When she reached the open doorway and heard the words he was reading, her breath caught. The piece wasn't angry or defensive. It was tender, reflective, and unexpectedly honest. She realized instantly that it was about the letter, about her, even without her name being spoken. The realization washed over her like warm rain, disarming and unsettling all at once. Her chest tightened with a mix of guilt and something softer she didn't want to name. She slipped away quietly before he saw her, but the echo of his voice stayed with her long after. For the first time, she wondered what it might feel like to let someone see her without the armor. The next few days unfolded with a quiet shift neither of them fully acknowledged. Their conversations were brief at first. Simple greetings, small comments, gentle exchanges that carried more meaning than either dared to name. Each interaction felt like stepping across a fragile bridge, testing the strength of something still forming between them. Amina found herself watching him more closely, noticing how he moved with a kind of calm purpose, how his presence softened the air around him. Jordan, in turn, caught glimpses of her when she thought no one was looking, moments when her guard slipped and revealed something tender beneath. They didn't talk about the letter, though its memory hovered between them like a shared secret. Instead, they spoke about small things: art, poetry, the weather, each word smoothing the edges left by old wounds. For the first time, being near each other didn't feel heavy. It felt like possibility. Amina found herself opening up in small ways she hadn't expected. One afternoon, while working on her mural concept, she told Jordan about the first time she painted something big, how she'd felt both terrified and alive at the same time. Her voice softened as she described how art became her refuge when words failed her. Jordan listened with the kind of attention that made her feel seen rather than studied. He didn't interrupt or offer empty praise. He simply asked questions that showed he cared to understand her world. Each answer she gave loosened a knot inside her, making space for the quiet warmth growing between them. She noticed how easy it felt to talk to him, how her defenses lowered without her trying. The realization unsettled her, but it also made her chest expand in a way she hadn't felt in years, like she was finally allowed to breathe. Jordan surprised himself by sharing parts of his inner world too. He invited Amina into the small writing room he used at the center, a space cluttered with books, notebooks, and quiet memories. He told her how poetry helped him make sense of feelings he didn't always know how to say out loud, how writing became a bridge between the person he was and the person he was trying to become. Amina listened with soft eyes, sensing the weight behind his words. For a moment, he hesitated at the edge of a truth he wasn't sure he wanted to reveal. How much of his writing had been shaped by grief he still carried, but the gentle stillness between them made it easier to breathe, and he let the silence hold what he wasn't ready to explain. Being open with her felt strangely natural, like she made room in the world for him without asking anything in return. Their connection deepened in moments of unexpected ease. One afternoon, while helping sort donated art supplies for the center, they found themselves laughing more than talking. It wasn't a loud or wild laughter, just soft bursts of joy that came naturally, surprising them both. Amina noticed how comfortable she felt around him, how his presence seemed to smooth out the edges of her thoughts. Jordan felt something inside him brighten each time she smiled, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. There were no heavy conversations, no echoes of the letter, just a simple pleasure of being near each other. For the first time, they both experienced a moment that wasn't about past wounds or misunderstandings. It was about the warmth growing quietly between them, steady and gentle, like sunlight slipping into a room that had been dark for too long. As the week came to a close, Amina returned to her mural sketch, feeling something new stirring inside her. The design began to shift under her hands, evolving from sharp angles and heavy shadows into softer, more hopeful shapes. She didn't tell Jordan the letter had inspired the original concept, nor that his unexpected kindness was now shaping its transformation. The quiet between them was no longer tense. It felt like a doorway opening slowly. When Jordan visited the art room to check on her progress, she didn't tense like before. Instead, she felt a warm flutter she tried to ignore. He complimented her work gently, not with the exaggerated awe she feared from others, but with sincerity that reached her. In that moment, she realized something had changed, not just between them, but within herself. She wasn't ready to name it yet, but she could feel the shift settling into her heart. Amina had been feeling it for days. The slow, worn shift in her chest whenever Jordan walked into a room, the ease she felt in his presence, the quiet joy that snuck up on her when he laughed. She tried to ignore it, tried to bury the fluttering feeling under work and routine, but the more she saw him, the harder it became to pretend nothing was changing. When she caught herself smiling at the sound of his voice one afternoon, the truth hit her with a force she wasn't prepared for. She was falling for him. Softly, reluctantly, and without permission. The realization frightened her. She didn't know how to trust something that felt this gentle, this kind. She feared ruining it, feared repeating old mistakes, feared letting someone close enough to see the parts of her she kept hidden. And beneath it all, the letter lingered like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Jordan had sensed something different in the way Amina moved around him. something quiet and hesitant, like she was learning to breathe in a new way. One evening, he gathered the courage to tell her the truth about the letter, how he had read it every night, not because he wanted to cling to pain, but because her words revealed something honest, something raw, something human he couldn't ignore. When he finally said it, his voice steady but vulnerable, he didn't expect the sudden stillness that washed over her. He thought honesty would bring them closer, but instead her expression shifted into something wounded and confused. She looked at him as though he'd just confessed something terrible. The air thickened between them, and for the first time he saw fear in her eyes. Not of him, but of what she believed his confession meant. Amina's reaction wasn't what Jordan imagined. Instead of relief or understanding, panic rose inside her like a tide. She stepped back, her breath unsteady as she tried to make sense of what he had said. The idea that he had read her hurt over and over made her chest ache in a way she couldn't hide. She didn't hear the tenderness in his words, only the fear that he had fallen in love with her brokenness, not with her. She worried that he was drawn to the pain she carried, the parts of her she tried desperately to protect. Old memories surged, memories of being valued only when she was hurting. She pulled away before she could stop herself, muttering something about needing space. Jordan tried to reach for her with words, but she was already walking off, her heart pounding, her thoughts spiraling faster than she could catch them. The days that followed were heavy and slow. Amina avoided the center, throwing herself into work as a way to outrun the unease swirling inside her. Every time she thought of Jordan's confession, her stomach tightened. She replayed his words again and again, twisting them into possibilities that hurt more than the truth. She hated how easily fear took over, how quickly she withdrew the moment someone tried to love her gently. Meanwhile, Jordan kept his distance, unsure of how to reach her without causing more pain. He wanted to explain, to tell her he didn't love her darkness. He loved the strength behind it, the softness she tried to hide, but he didn't push. Instead, he carried the letter in his pocket like a symbol of something he wasn't ready to give up on. Both of them lived in the quiet ache of what wasn't being said. Jordan spent his evenings wandering the empty auditorium, trying to understand where everything had shifted. He replayed the moment she pulled away, wondering if he had said too much, or if the truth simply hit too close to wounds she hadn't healed. He didn't blame her. He knew what it was like to fear being seen too deeply. The silence between them grew heavier by the day, but he refused to let it become a permanent wall. He wrote another letter, shorter this time, gentler, though he didn't know if he'd ever give it to her. It wasn't a plea or an apology, just a simple truth about how her words had awakened something in him he thought was gone. As he read the draft under the soft stage lights, he felt the ache of missing her settle deeper. They were both standing at the edge of a choice neither felt ready to make. Jordan spent the next morning sitting at his kitchen table, the final letter he'd written resting in front of him like a quiet truth he wasn't sure she was ready for. The words were simple, honest, stripped of anything that might overwhelm her. He had written about how her letter didn't hurt him. It woke him up, reminded him that feeling anything at all meant he wasn't numb anymore. But as he read it again, he felt uncertainty pull at him. He didn't want to push her or make her feel cornered, not when he sensed how easily she could slip back behind her walls. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket, unsure if it belonged in her hands or if it was just something he needed to write for himself. Either way, it held a truth he could no longer hide. He cared for her in a way he didn't expect, and that truth was slowly changing him. Amina returned to her mural after days of avoiding the community center, hoping the familiar smell of paint would steady her. She stood in front of the unfinished design, feeling a shift inside her she couldn't ignore. The sharp lines she had once drawn with anger now felt foreign, disconnected from who she was becoming. Without fully understanding why, she dipped her brush into softer colors and began painting new shapes, curves instead of edges, warmth instead of tension. With every stroke, she felt something inside her loosen, like she was letting go of a weight she had been carrying far too long. She thought of Jordan, of the way he looked at her with gentle understanding rather than judgment. Part of her still feared what that meant, but another part, the part that had been buried under old wounds, felt ready to breathe again. For the first time, she wanted to create from a place of healing instead of hurt. Later that afternoon, Amina visited her grandmother again, feeling the pull toward the one person who always seemed to understand her without explanation. She sat on the couch while Grandma Lila knitted slowly, the steady rhythm somehow grounding her. When Amina finally admitted she might have pushed Jordan away for the wrong reasons, her grandmother smiled gently, a knowing expression that made Amina's chest tighten. She didn't offer judgment, only wisdom wrapped in warmth. She told Amina that love isn't meant to feed on pain. It's meant to hold the parts of us we're afraid to show. Amina felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the realization that she had spent years believing love and hurt came in the same package. Her grandmother's words softened something deep within her, making space for the possibility that someone could see her clearly and still choose her. The truth felt frightening, but also freeing. Jordan walked into the community center late that evening, driven by a quiet ache he could no longer ignore. The halls were mostly empty, the soft hum of overhead lights echoing around. When he reached the auditorium, he stepped inside and let the stillness settle over him. He needed clarity, needed to know whether holding on to the letter to his feelings was helping or hurting. He sat on the stage where he had once read her anger like a confession, and for the first time he allowed himself to acknowledge the fear beneath his tenderness. He worried she would never believe he cared for her beyond her hurt, worried she would always expect him to disappear like others had. But sitting there, under the warm, dim lights, he realized he wasn't afraid of loving her. He was afraid she didn't know she deserved it. That truth hit him harder than anything else. That night, Amina walked through the quiet streets with a growing certainty pulsing through her. She didn't know if she was ready to face him fully, but she knew she couldn't keep hiding behind fear. She replayed every moment they had shared. The softness in his voice, the patience in his eyes, the way he never pushed her, but still managed to see her clearly. She thought about the letter, about how it had been written from a place of pain she hadn't yet learned to let go of. Now, she felt ready to confront what that letter represented, ready to step towards someone who had shown her gentleness she didn't know how to receive. By the time she reached her building, she felt something inside her settle. She wasn't healed yet, not completely, but she was becoming someone who could be. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted him to see that version of her. Amina returned to the community center at dusk, the time of day when everything felt softer and more honest. The mural waited for her, unfinished but transformed, much like she felt inside. She stood in front of it with a quiet sense of purpose, holding a fresh sheet of paper trembling slightly in her hand. She began writing slowly, letting the words spill out with more truth than she had ever allowed before. It wasn't an apology or an explanation. It was clarity, the kind she had run from for years. She didn't erase the original letter in her mind. She simply wrote through it, around it, giving voice to the parts of herself she had kept hidden. When she finished, her heart felt lighter, steadier. She folded the new letter gently, knowing exactly who it was for. This time, the words weren't born from anger. They were born from growth. Jordan returned to the center later that evening, uncertain whether he wanted company or solitude. He drifted into the auditorium out of habit, only to find the space illuminated by a gentle wash of amber light. Something felt different, lighter, almost expectant. When he approached the stage, he noticed an envelope placed where he usually sat. His name was written in soft, deliberate handwriting he recognized instantly. His breath caught as he lifted it, feeling the familiar weight of her words before even reading them. Sitting on the edge of the stage, he unfolded the letter and let his eyes move across each line slowly. Instead of anger, he found vulnerability, honesty, and a quiet courage. She wrote about fear, healing, and the unexpected ways he had reached her. With every sentence, something inside him softened even more. By the time he finished, he felt his chest open in a way that made breathing easier. Amina waited near the mural, unsure whether he would come to find her or leave quietly with the letter. Her heart thudded with each passing moment, but she didn't try to run from the uncertainty this time. When she finally heard footsteps in the hallway, her breath caught. Jordan appeared in the doorway, holding her letter gently, as if it were something fragile and precious. His expression wasn't confused or conflicted. It was warm, open, almost relieved. She felt her body loosen slightly, the tension melting from her shoulders. Neither spoke at first, but the silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like something sacred. When he stepped closer, she could see that her honesty had reached him in ways she hadn't dared to hope. She didn't know what he would say, but she was finally ready to listen without fear clouding her vision. When Jordan finally spoke, his voice was steady, but there was emotion beneath it that made Amina's eyes soften. He told her he didn't love her pain. He loved the strength she carried beneath it, the softness she kept guarded, the way she fought to feel again, even when she was scared. She listened carefully, letting his words settle into the parts of her she had kept locked away. For the first time, she didn't flinch from the truth. Instead, she stepped closer, closing the distance that had once felt impossible. She admitted she had been afraid he loved the broken version of her, not the real her. He shook his head gently, saying he wanted all of her, not just the wounds. The moment felt fragile and sacred, like two people learning how to hold each other without letting fear speak louder than love. Later, they walked into the quiet auditorium together, drawn to the place where their story had first shifted. Jordan held both letters, the one that hurt and the one that healed, and asked her softly if he could keep them both, not as reminders of pain, but as proof of growth. Amina nodded, her heart warming at the idea of someone honoring all sides of her. They sat on the edge of the stage, shoulders brushing, sharing a silence that felt peaceful instead of uncertain. She realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of love, not of the vulnerability that once felt dangerous. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had shaped them into people ready to choose each other. As the lights dimmed around them, she whispered a question almost too soft to hear, asking if he ever believed love could grow from something broken. His gentle smile was all the answer she needed.